All right, Gary Williams is here. Gary, this is a big one for me. Growing up watching Morning Drive, I've been a long time admirer of you from the sidelines, watching you on Golf Channel as I was growing up, and then getting you now back on Golf Channel again, coming full circle in present day with your work with Five Clubs. Thanks for joining me on this Thursday afternoon, man. I've got a number of things I can't wait to dive in with you about.
Andy, thank you. It's my pleasure. I appreciate it. Listen, it's the admiration is mutual. I appreciate what you're doing. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation because you obviously display a range of curiosity about this game that is very similar to my own. So I know that you and I can park it right here, go in any direction, and wherever it leads us, we'll figure it out.
I think I want to start macro and big picture with you because as somebody who has also started a business in the golf space in the last 3 to 5 months, and I talk about this with Kyle Porter a lot because he's on a similar journey, but I'm just so fascinated what that process was like for you of starting Five Clubs, what the original vision for that was, and what it's been like going out on your own, taking a career risk, and seeing what I imagine are a lot of your dreams and hopes for the company come to fruition in a pretty short period of time.
It's the idea of not necessarily what it's become as far as Five Clubs, and I think it's important that I give you and obviously the viewers, the listeners, context. When I left Golf Channel, that wasn't my decision, but I was the architect of the consequences that led to me leaving. I was not well at the time. I was somebody who was battling with alcoholism, and so when I left there, it wasn't with the idea of starting Five Clubs, but my thoughts and my kind of vision of what I thought I wanted to do, and this is going back to 2018. And I left Golf Channel at the end of 2020. And again, I was the architect of my departure there. And let me just say, and I've said this, and this is not about me trying to appear to be somebody who's trying to claim valor here. I got so much support from people as I was struggling with a lot of things, in my own life away from my job. It wasn't dissatisfaction with my job. I loved what I was doing. But going back to 2018, I didn't know where my next chapter was going to be, whether it was going to be 3 years from 2018, whether it was going to be 5 years. You and I were talking about different things, and you had mentioned the name Bill Simmons, and Bill Simmons was and still remains a big inspiration for me because I wanted to, at some point in my career, create some type of platform that was an aggregate of voices, that was kind of a community of contributors that I think in the grand scheme of things were like-minded, but possessed the autonomy to take whatever space they had and use it any way they wanted to, but it was going to be about golf. And so I talked about this idea with some industry people, and it didn't necessarily go anywhere at that time. And then after I left Golf Channel, I wasn't sure what was going to be next. And so my wife and I moved back to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I lived formally from 1996 to 2009. And I didn't need to reconnect with this person, but a dear friend of mine who had a very successful sports marketing agency for, at the time, what was almost 25 years, but he had never had any clients, or he had never done anything in the golf space. And we had talked about what, not necessarily me being involved, if he did anything, what would it be? And so I was seeing this kind of growth and proliferation of content creators on the digital side of things getting traction. And so I said, what about the idea of creating a digital media platform and also trying to create a way for us to use that platform to identify clients to do, whether it's branding or marketing or activations or experiential types of things for them, which is what you've always done, which I have no experience doing. And what about that? And that's really what the genesis of Five Clubs was. And so I will say this, I knew nothing about the digital space. I admired, still do, and found inspiration from a lot of people like
Yeah.
Andy Johnson, Brendan Porath, and Chris Solomon, and the guys at No Laying Up and
Yeah. Me as
Friday.
well.
And what they've done. What they've done is wildly impressive, not only because they've monetized it, Andy, but I think you and I feel the same way. It's really good. And
Yeah.
so I said, you know what? There is an audience. Let's do it a little bit different way, with me kind of being someone who's going to do long form conversations and then try to identify people who can contribute in modest ways because they have real jobs, like Gil Hance, like
Yeah.
Jay Billis, who's a Dookie like you,
Mhm.
who loves golf. And I don't know what we were going to do with Jay, and then and the identification of someone like Johnson Wagner and Brendan DeYoung. And so here we are several years later, and I can promise you, never in my wildest dreams did I think that Golf Channel was going to leave the light on for me, but they did. And
Yeah.
so here we sit with a live television show, and this community of voices with an aspiration to grow that community. And it's still with the presence on the digital side, but now with this linear television product that's allowed us to do some other things.
Well, I have to say, first and foremost, a lot of similarities that we share. First and foremost, my sobriety is the number one thing that I'm proud of in my life, more so than anything that I could possibly ever create with Inside Sports Network. It's the number one reason I'm able to have this conversation with you. And hearing you share that brotherhood, and I remember some of the things that you talked about around the death of Grayson Murray and your specific interview with Willie Wilcox, who's become a loose friend of me as well through this journey over the years. Personally, I've appreciated your tone and candor on the topic a lot, just in terms of somebody that I can look up to as somebody who's also on that path. Um, so it's great to have that bond with you there, but also in terms of, I think, your broader vision and what you're trying to create. I relate a lot to the business model that you're speaking of. And I the number one thing that I was thinking about, because I was so happy when I saw that you were back on Golf Channel in the mornings. From your prior days at Golf Channel with Morning Drive, did you learn a bunch of things and see kind of the model that Golf Channel had with Morning Drive in the past, and think about, across all of those years that you weren't working with Golf Channel and on air anymore, were there a bunch of things that you thought about and wanted to employ and do differently if you ever got that opportunity again to have that morning slot?
God, what a question. Yes. And again, to just
Because
reiterate,
it's not
yeah,
Morning Drive, and I loved Morning Drive, but I think there are a couple specific key differences that I could clearly tell just from the outside looking in as a viewer, that you are approaching this endeavor with a bit of a different mindset.
you're very perceptive, and yes. I'll just take you back to the origins of Morning Drive were very interesting. And Tom Stathakis was the gentleman who hired me, who was running Golf Channel at the time. And actually, his vision was for Morning Drive to be obviously the foundation of the content of the program was always going to be golf, but it was with this idea of giving us some elasticity to venture into other areas and talk about other sports. And that was one of the reasons why Eric Casillas, who had no background in golf whatsoever, came from ESPN, was hired to be the co-host with me, and obviously Holly was the third member of the team, and it looked like a radio show, and it presented itself like a radio show. And we didn't support it with a lot of B-roll and video footage. It was two guys, two mics that looked like a radio show in a very small confined area. And then after 2 years, because it gained some real traction, we moved into a new studio and we made the show much broader. And just look, it was broader than I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
And I think that the industry of golf, which makes it $100 billion industry, is why people are interested in instruction, in fitness, and fashion, and travel. But I didn't want to be doing that myself on a regular basis as much as we were doing it. I wanted a more narrow focus, not as narrow as it being just pro golf recap, which I'll get to in just a second. I wanted it to be talking about the industry of golf and governance, which can be dense and can get boring pretty quickly. But I think if you dabble in that, especially now, because there's some real weighty things that are going on as it pertains to the governance of the game of golf, and then an area that you are very passionate about, and I love as well, which is the design aspect of the industry of golf. And we're in a period right now that I don't need to see it 20 years from now in the rearview mirror to know how good it is, how thoughtful it is, and people are interested in that. So I think what the show is now is kind of a hybrid of what it was in its origins, and then to a degree what it eventually became by 2018, 29, 2020. So it's been harnessed to a degree. And look, I had great producers from Jeremy Davis to Jeff Newbarth, John Burkett, Aaron Bearden, the late Kyle Brown. These, and I'm forgetting a few of them probably, Chloe Pistorius, who's still doing golf today. These are very, very capable people. Tim Killian, another one. I'm not saying I knew more than them, but I always felt like I had good intuition about what the direction of what we should be doing was. And I'm not saying I was deprived my voice. I had my voice, but now I'm the executive producer of what we're doing. And if we fail, I raise my hand. I want us to, if we're given the time and the patience of the viewer and the listener, because we have the redundancy of SiriusXM with the simulcast, I want everybody who's invested in golf, whether you care about pro golf and what's going on in the PGA Tour, and to whatever degree LIV, DP World Tour, I want to satisfy that. I want to talk about the business of golf. I'll dabble a little bit in instruction. I want to talk about history. I want to talk about books. I want to talk about design. And over time, I want people to feel like he didn't talk about what I love today, but boy, does he get to the things that I like. And I'm not doing this alone. Obviously, I got a community of voices here that's growing with people like Gabby Herzig, who's now a regular.
She's excellent. Good friend of mine. And I thought that was a great move by you guys.
She's a star. She's going to be a star. And look, something else that we're developing is I think of pro golf as not the PGA Tour. The PGA Tour and the best players in the world, it's a really glitzy television show that people watch on the weekends, and you and I nerd out, and we'll watch Thursdays and Fridays. And then you come down the stretch and somebody makes a fat check and they get on a private plane. Pro golf is this journey, this pursuit. And so Cole Hammer is now part of our community. And I told him when I said, will you be a part of this? I don't want to talk about how many greens you hit last week in Chile. I want to talk about you traveling the world and learning about yourself and trying to get better as a person, and the challenges of being alone and advancing in the game and trying to get to that highest level. So yes, we'll talk about the Valero Texas Open, but we'll talk about other things that I'd like to believe people have an interest in, because you know what? I pay attention to what you're doing. And I'll tell you that the area that I haven't figured out yet, and I promise you, I'm going to lean on you, is wagering and understanding data and the application of data as it relates to course setups and I don't want people to overindulge, but look, it's part of
It's
this
it's
artistry.
unavoidable.
It's unavoidable. And
Yeah.
I want to do it and lean on people that I know I can trust to give people, not like, hey, you need to go all in on this. It's no, if you're gonna indulge it, you know what? Be weaponized with information that will be useful to you making those decisions. So that's an area that I'm getting ready to reach out to you about. So long answer is Morning Drive in its origin, if they lock the door of that studio, and I can tell you that not that the best players in the world are the audience that mattered the most to me, but more people have told me that what that was in its inception was what they loved the most. And
Yeah.
it's not that they didn't like the other stuff, but they were attracted most to what Morning Drive was 14 years ago.
I think the next question I ask you will also somewhat transition us into talking a bit about the Masters, which, of course, I promise we'll get there. This is a Masters preview for a reason. But I'm so curious about how you think the culture of professional golf and the golf landscape has changed between now and then. Like, let's use architecture as an example. Um, the development and the growth that we are seeing in the architecture space right now, both in philosophy, and in the types of projects, although I wish a lot more of those exciting projects were in the public space as opposed to this trend of billionaire destination clubs. Um, but just even in terms of the philosophy and where the architecture industry is heading, it's in like such a remarkably different place than it was in the 90s. In terms of the culture of pro golf itself in a post live era, we are in such a different place than I think we were with pro golf when PGA Tour was the only show in town and Tiger was completely the biggest star of the show right now. In terms of like what you're seeing in a broader sense of where golf is going and how you are trying to have your finger on the pulse with that every single morning. I mean, what do you think is like different right now than it was back in the day in this specific moment in pro golf? Because it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently in terms of like, where should I be heading, right? Do I think that if I invest all of my resources into breaking down these golf courses week to week on the PGA Tour until I'm blue in the face, is that what people want because they're so excited about gambling on these tournaments every single week? Should I be focusing all of my resources into 4 weeks out of the year, almost like the Jeff Shackelford model, where he's basically been like, listen, there are 4 real weeks of the year here, and I'm not going to concern myself with the other fluff. I mean, where do you see it going right now in terms of pro golf and in the next 5 years? I don't mean to make this a whole merger conversation,
Sure.
but I'm curious if you have any thoughts about where pro golf is at right now, because I think it is at a bit of a fascinating inflection point. And if you have any opinions on where you think it might be headed in the next couple of years.
Yeah, there's several things that I'd love to touch on. One, your question about your resources and your focus and your direction, and then the other part about where pro golf was and where it currently is and where it might be going. Let me start with that part first, and I think part of it, again, we kind of root our viewpoints are rooted in primarily our own experiences. It doesn't mean that we all, view things myopically. I'd like to believe that I don't, but I can tell you that when I got to Golf Channel, one of the things that was easier for us then is that, one, we were new. All of a sudden, Golf Channel has got a morning show, so there was an outlet for players to be seen and heard in a different way. It was not the newsy, it wasn't quite as newsy and kind of Pro Golf Recap as Golf Central was. So I can just tell you in the first year, the number of players who made the choice without compensation, by the way, to come in and co-host the show. And these are not your run-of-the-mill guys. These are the Bubba Watsons. Bubba, the day after he won the Masters in 2012, unbeknownst to me and Eric Casilius and Holly, he walked into our studio right around 12 hours after he put the green jacket on. And it was put together by the president of Golf Channel, Mike McCarley, who's now the guy who's the guy who's driving TGL and Tomorrow Sports. Before he went to New York, he came to Morning Drive. Yeah. And Graham McDowell and Ian Poulter and Lee Westwood, and Martin Keimer when he's ascending to world number one, and Luke Donald and Keegan Bradley, who took a G5 overnight from Phoenix to be our first guest in our new studio. They're not just on satellite links, they're coming to our studio. And so there was this willingness. 2 weeks after Rory McIlroy, 3 weeks after Rory had the back nine implosion at the 2011 Masters, I'm caddying for him at Muirfield Village on the Wednesday of the Memorial. And I've got a camera crew and spent the day with him. And then, 10 days later, he wins the US Open. He gave me a whole day. And Jordan Spieth, subsequently after that, in 2014, after he didn't have the same experience Rory did, Bubba was better, won the Masters. And I reached out to Jay Danzy, and we did the same type of concept with Jordan. My grand point is there was this ease of access that was presented to us from a lot of players. Lydia Ko did a driving lesson in the parking lot of Golf Channel with Damon Hack. I feel like now there's far more insulation. There's these human firewalls. Access is much less achievable to these guys because in 2011, social media was in its infancy. Yeah. And so nobody had really figured out how to control their own messaging. And obviously YouTube Golf didn't exist at all. So that is a significant shift. Now you're seeing the best players in the world identify, the Grant Horvaths and the 4Play Pod and those guys, and Barstool going, well, I'll be damned. They got millions of followers. I'll use that. So traditional kind of legacy media, not as useful as it used to be. So that's a definite change. And then as it relates to you, and this is something that I think, like, I look at what you're doing and I'm inspired by it. I'm curious about it. But I think the duality of you doing what you're doing, like really digging in and peeling back layers and almost providing super stats and data and extrapolating, this empirical evidence of why certain players make sense here and there, but also applying that. I don't want you to abandon your passion for design and the way that you look at that. And I think that there is a pathway for you going forward where you can satisfy completely the interest of people who want to wager on professional golf, while also providing people a view of the design principles of new stuff, classic stuff, that is different from the cerebral approach of Andy Johnson, which I love. Yeah. And the no laying up guys, which is more of kind of this optical, beautiful presentation, and the way that those guys go out and experience it the way that they do. There is a lane for you. And I think that to me, and look, everybody wants to make it worthwhile in terms of, let's make this make sense financially. But I'd like to believe that can be achieved while you are also finding stimulation and satisfaction doing both of those things for yourself spiritually and intellectually.
To give you a little background, more so in terms of the genesis of my idea and what I've been trying to create, because you basically hit the nail on the head of what I'm trying to do. But my first job coming out of college was an intern at Golf Digest. And I'll be brief with the story because I've a lot of people that are listening to the podcast know my background already. But I was given essentially two jobs at Golf Digest as an intern. Um, and I'm still grateful to Stephen Hennessy to this day, because I've had internships in the past where, it's really just getting coffee and they don't tell you to really get your hands dirty and do anything and allow you to learn. But the two jobs that I had um, at Golf Digest as an intern were, number one, I was in charge of inputting golf course reviews into their database. So essentially, one of their golf course raters would play a golf course, and I would have to read their review and input it into this massive, massive spreadsheet and compile all of those reviews in different categories. And so I basically developed, over this year-long internship during COVID, this encyclopedic knowledge of golf courses, that I didn't know if I was going to be able to have any use of in the future. But I was a competitive junior golfer and stuff, so I was already into golf courses. But I developed this like random encyclopedic knowledge of like all of the top 500 golf courses in America, and started to learn and know the ins and outs of what people thought about these golf courses without ever seeing most of them myself. And the second thing that I was asked to do at Golf Digest was, they said, "Hey, listen, the PGA Tour has all of these new partnerships with betting. The PGA Tour, now has like, they're working with BetMGM, FanDuel, whatever. We at Golf Digest, a legacy media company, we now have to cover this. Okay. So whether we like it or not, and a lot of those legacy media companies are very, very slow adapters. Like, we were just able to send one of our team members to the Masters this year, but like, the Masters historically has had zero interest in gambling companies or gambling creators coming to Augusta, and covering the Masters or being recognized or credentialed whatsoever. So I'm glad that we're starting to see some progress in that area. But at the time, Golf Digest was almost like, shoot, we have to cover this. So I'm going to need you to start writing gambling columns for us every single week. And over time, I basically just married the two things together. I basically just said to myself, if you actually can understand the architecture of a golf course, you actually may be able to predict the outcome of a professional golf tournament. So if you start to look at, like, what are the staples of a Tom Fazio golf course? Well, he generally likes to design these giant wide fairways with a lot of land movement that are incredibly generous off the tee to bigger hitters, and these large undulating green complexes that provide a lot of slope and undulation, but really cater to a type of player that like hits the ball a tremendously long way off the tee, and also is incredibly savvy on and around the greens, whether that's via lag putting or chipping off of short grass. And so essentially over time, I just got really good at looking at the architecture of a golf course. And maybe this transitioned us into talking about Augusta, but looking at the architecture of the golf course and figuring out how the architecture of a golf course, as well as strokes gained and analytics, would predict the outcome of the tournament. And I was very fortunate to be early on that block and formulate my own little niche company and career out of that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, and that's why I love talking to you. And I'm just so curious about other people that have their finger on the pulse about this, about like, where is golf going? Because I think to myself, like, should I be focusing solely on the majors and these massive 4 weeks of the year, or is the PGA Tour in a better spot than it was 5 years ago? Should I be covering Live? Should I be covering TGL? Those are all questions that, like, I love getting people like yours opinions on, because I'm not sure I totally know the right answer of it. But I mean, we'll get to the master stuff in a second, but I think golf is at a really interesting time if you're somebody like you and I, where we both have a lot of flexibility to kind of talk about and platform the things that we want to talk about. And I'm still kind of figuring out what the best usage of my talent is in that sense.
Yeah, the PGA Tour question um, is wildly interesting. There's so many aspects of it that, and it's so fluid because, look, my intuition 6 weeks ago told me, based on conversations that I was having with people, and I don't pursue the investigative reporting side of things. I have conversations with people that I trust, and I got the sense, and it was a pretty good sense, that they had momentum in terms of finding some type of detente, and define that any way you want with respect to live in the PGA Tour, and some type of pathway forward for integration into one, and maybe a little bit into the other. And when I say a little bit, meaning the PGA Tour players on the live side, but much more of live players, getting a modest level of the platform back themselves. But I also continue to lean on a couple of different people that I trust implicitly about understanding how complicated and inconsistent dealing with particularly the Saudis is when it comes to anything,
Yeah.
and specifically when it comes to sports enterprises. They may project all they want about a desire to become less petroleum dependent as an economy by 2030. And I read all about the Vision 2030 as we're getting ready to have these conversations 5 years ago. But they're not going to just suddenly change. And what you can't change is that they play by their rules, and their rules are whatever rules they decide to make up for themselves. So whatever progress you think you may have, that progress might go away altogether, just like that. And I think that's what's happened here. I'm pretty sure that is exactly what's happened here. So I don't know that aspect of the question. What I do know is this, is that the PGA Tour, which has always had a tiered system, Andy, as you know, it was Tiger events and non-Tiger events, and the ones that had them were signature series events
Yeah.
without having the branding, and the ones that didn't weren't. And so now he doesn't play competitive golf anymore. So now we have these bloated purses, which the word term non-sustainable gets belabored a lot, but it's true. It's not sustainable. They can't, but these guys are not going to take a haircut. So what do you do? What do you do is you basically have a couple different tours, which is okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's the brand of the PGA Tour. This subset of events is essentially where the best players play. And then the rest of it is for dimpleheads like me and you, which is real pressure and real tension, because this is about employment. And if they can create some real, like, tangible belief that relegation exists for whether it's a quarter of the workforce or a third or whatever it is, and we can talk about that down the road, that's what the rest of professional golf is going to look like. That's what I think 2026 to a modest degree is going to be. And then 2027 and going forward is what the PGA Tour is going to be.
Well, as far as professional golf goes, I still would probably say that the next 7 to 10 days are probably amongst my favorite of the year, if not my
Easily.
most favorite of the year. And I have to ask you, there are a couple narrative questions that I'm curious about in terms of how you think the tournament is going to play out. And we'll talk about some of the specific players. But starting big picture, I can't imagine how many Masters you've been to at this point. What's your favorite part of Masters Week? Like, you probably have 7 different traditions that you are used to doing for all of those years that you've been to Augusta. I popped my cherry last year and went with my dad for the first time last year. Um, I'm just so curious. Like, I have to imagine that people like you that have been going for so long have developed like all these little tiny micro nuances and routines about that week. What stands out to you about your favorite part of Masters Week?
My God. So you and I could talk about this for at least an hour. My first experience was with my dad. It was with
Yeah.
my mom and dad. It still makes me emotional. It really does
Yeah.
because
Me too.
um, I like you, growing up, loving golf, watching this tournament on television, devoting every single, live moment that we got of it. And for me, it was even more modest. It was USA Network on Thursday and Friday for 2 hours from 4 to 6.
Yeah.
And then CBS on the weekend, where the final groups on Saturday would already be on the seventh hole. And it's like, oh my God, we're still getting more than 9 holes. I went for the first time in 1991. My parents told me that I was going. Um, the previous the previous fall, I was going to Ireland with my mom and dad, and they told me in the Newark airport, and I cried. I mean, I cried in the Newark airport, knowing that I was going to go to the Masters, like 6, 7 months later. My traditions to this day, there's a couple that I still do every time when I get there. I always walk the second nine by myself. So first thing I do when I get there.
Is this on Monday of Masters Week?
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So I'll get there. I'll get there Monday afternoon. I'm going to do the show. We've got a 2-hour show this Monday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern time from our studios in Charlotte. I'll get in the car. It'll be the most, just anxious, great 2 hours and 15-minute drive down I-77 to I-20 and the Washington Road exit. And I will, Andy, I'll walk the second nine, and I'll make a point of getting behind that 10th tee and looking at those loblolly pines that are cascading, and crossing each other behind that 10th green. That's the first thing I do. I always make a point of stopping and looking back at the turning point. And it's really not the turning point. It's much more of kind of from about 100 yards out to the 13th green. I always love looking back because it's a memory of Ben Crenshaw when he won there for the first time in 1984, of making a decision of whether to go for the green after making birdie on 12 or laying up. And he thought he saw Billy Joe Patton like in the sunlight that Sunday in 1984. And of course, the story of him not laying up and him kind of blowing his chance to win the Masters as an amateur. And I always stop there and I look back. When you look back from that point, you see the Nelson Bridge and the Hogan Bridge framing the 13th tee and the 12th green. And the 12th green is golf's grandest stage because the only people who are on that stage are the main players. There are no extras on that side of those bridges.
Yeah.
It's the most serene place in the world.
Yeah.
So
that little corner of the property, the first time you see it, I think is truly amongst the biggest wow factors. I mean, of course, when you first walk into Augusta for the first time, the scale blows you away, right? Like, I know that this is the most obvious take that everybody says about the Masters, but the television screen truly does not do the place justice. Like, there are so many things about the property. The sixth hole is an example, right? Okay. On television cameras do not remotely convey the elevation change between the tee shot on 6, that giant canyon, and the green. Like, 6 is a dramatic golf hole. Okay. And there's so many parts of the property like that where it's just like, oh my gosh, this is so much different than what I imagined on television. And I felt the same way the first time you see that little corner of the property of 11 green, the 12th hole, and then 13 tee into 13 fairway. It's my favorite part of the property.
I mean, it gives me chills. You sharing, look, you went with your dad last year. and these images, these spaces are indelible for you. The last thing I'll share among, a couple other things that I always do, I always make a point of going out and just spending time looking at the fifth green, the
Yeah.
14th green. And then on Sunday mornings, I always go over there, at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I just walk across the property. I walk down the hill where, the old members range used to be, which is, obviously adjacent to the 9th fairway and the 18th fairway. You walk down that hill, and I always think, like, God, if they ever got like this amazing snowfall, what it would be like to sled down that hill, toward the seventh green, toward the seventh green and the eighth tee. But I always walk across the crosswalks on 3 and 15 down to the 13th green. And the other thing for people who've never been there, that the first time I got there, I could not believe how close in proximity the 13th green obviously is to the 14th tee, but the 13th green to the 16th tee. Like
Yeah.
the confluence of 13, 14, 15, and 16, and how it's not the lowest point. The lowest point is obviously 11 green and 12 green in the tributary of Rays Creek that fronts 12. But that area, and it's so shadowy to get down in there, and you're going, oh my God. Like you just do a panoramic, and you're going, like, the number of things that have happened right in that little quadrant of the property is mind-blowing to think about.
Yeah. 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 I want to get in a little bit to this specific year of 2025 and what we're expecting for this specific Masters. Um, have you heard anything? In my research, it seems like thus far I haven't seen or heard of any major changes to the golf course. I'm really curious to start hearing about what it looks like on the grounds in terms of the weather, the firmness. It looks like, from what I'm seeing 10 days out, like pretty pristine, beautiful weather. I know the golf course took a little bit of a beating with some trees falling with the hurricane, but what are you expecting this week in terms of like how the golf course is going to play? Have you looked at the weather at all? Do you think it is a year where it's going to be particularly firm and spicy and windy? Have you heard anything or have any thoughts about what type of Masters we are going to get this year at Augusta National?
Yeah, that's also one of the great. It's just like, oh my gosh, like what might be different and what are we going to notice? And a couple things, just the fact that Fred Ridley is going to do like this preemptive. They're not necessarily calling it a press conference, but he's speaking Monday afternoon. That is unorthodox. He's also going to speak Wednesday, which is customary, but he's speaking Monday, I believe, at 2 p.m. Eastern time. I don't know what that is about. That is
That's
not
fascinating. That's unusual for him. He always has his Wednesday press conference, but he never speaks on Monday, huh?
No. So he's speaking on Monday, and clearly there's something substantive that he's going to share. Now, that what that substantive, the nature of it is, it may be to give a detailed update of the damage that was incurred, and specifically what happened around the 16th green. That green was severely damaged. Obviously, it's been rebuilt to whatever degree that it had. I've listened to, including Rory McIlroy, say that that whatever needed to be rebuilt with respect to contour and slope, everything is uniform. Nothing looks different in that respect. There's more light. There's less trees around, obviously the 16th green, and then in relation that 17th tee. But back to what you were saying, 6 backs up to, right behind 16 green is the low point of the 6th hole. That is a much more open area. I am fascinated to know what it is that he's going to dive into on Monday afternoon.
Yeah.
Rory suggested that there are 4 greens that are different. I don't know what that means.
I heard that too, and I was like, I'm not sure how to interpret that.
I don't either. Look, I don't expect it to be, something that people are going to say, well, could they, like 11 a couple of years ago, where there was a little bit of a lowering of what was the front right portion of that green, which again, there's a subtlety to all of this. But for these guys who go there every year that are trying to solve this Rubik's Cube, it's fairly significant. Those are the things that I've heard, that there are 4 greens that have some type of alteration. 16 optically is going to look more open and lighter. But again, the fact that Fred Ridley is going to speak Monday afternoon, I have no idea what direction that conversation and what information he's going to share, but he doesn't do that normally at all, ever.
That's fascinating. I think for me, as we sit here, I guess now 6 days out from when the tournament actually starts, there's one narrative that has clearly developed for me, in terms of what it seems like the complexion of the 2025 Masters is, and that is the Rory Scotty Masters. I think that these two players, from a statistical standpoint, the markets agree with this, but they have clearly lifted and separated themselves above everybody else in the prospective field right now, in terms of the level of play that they have shown, more so from Rory in closing that gap in 2025, but also adding in the context of Scotty's tremendous 2024 season where he won 8 times. Does it feel like to you, Gary, like those two players are elevating above everybody else Masters Week, and it really is the Rory Scotty show this year? And if there was somebody else to crash that party, that would be more of a surprise than a potential duel that could also be in the future for us as well.
Yeah, this. It's very precarious to be presumptuous about, putting people, especially in an environment as, I think psychologically and emotionally as challenging as that cauldron is. I think that they're the 2 best players in the world. I say that comfortably.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. And I think that one thing to give people who are like, well, Scheffler, he hadn't won yet this year, and, he hasn't been quite as good as iron play. Fair. But I will also say this. He has 6 starts. Last year, he didn't win until his 6th start, which was the Arnold Palmer Invitational. He was deprived a couple of starts because of the injury to his hand. So it's not like he's going to Augusta National in terms of him being stalled out, or gosh, think about the kind of year he had last year and he's not anywhere. Okay, yes, he was a freight train by the time he got to Augusta because he won the Arnold Palmer Invitational. He comes back and has a virtuoso Sunday at the Players, and he wins that, and all of a sudden, and yes, he won the Masters, then they won the Heritage, and it's like, oh my God, this is next level stuff. Rory is in a place that, one, he hadn't won twice before the middle of February, let alone the first of April. He's never had that type of production, but he can't bring his results to Augusta National. He can bring his form, and his form is excellent. And his off-speed stuff there's a refinement and an evolution to him.
Very well-rounded golf that he's playing right now.
Absolutely.
I think the fact that his 2 victories this year came at 2 of the least driver-intensive golf courses on the PGA Tour, and that he actually won those not via powerful driving, but more so with precision approach play. And he's honestly, it's underrated. This is some of the best putting that Rory has displayed in his entire 15-year career, the way that he's putting the ball right now.
Absolutely. And similarly, even though up until Houston, Scotty Scheffler, as far as like his 1-putt percentage, his 3-putt avoidance, was actually worse than last year. He had a very good week putting in Houston. Statistically, strokes gained, he's way ahead of where he was. And again, it's 6 events over the course of comparing it to his entire statistical year last year. So both these guys have good putting vibes. They have good putting stats. Here's the one thing about Rory, and it's not just one thing. I think physically and technically, even though he made that one comment to Kira Dixon after Houston about his elbow.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Here's what I make of it. I make of it as, okay, he's played, kind of a run of tournaments because he played the Arnold Palmer Invitational. He wins the Players, then he plays Houston. That's a density of starts that he didn't have. Like, he really, really was very particular to start the year, more so than the last couple of years. So maybe he was having a little bit of fatigue. I don't make that much of it. I think physically, technically, he's in a wonderful place. His mind, only he knows where, when he drives, he's carrying something nobody, not only presently, has to deal with ever. And when I say ever, I mean this respectfully to Gene Sarazen. Nobody knew what he won in 1935. He didn't know what he won.
Yeah.
I always lean on this line from Brandel Chambly. This goes back 6-7 years when he had a podcast on Golf Channel with Jaime Diaz. He said what Gene Sarazen won in 1935 was akin to the Hero World Challenge. It was. It was a Bobby Jones asking a bunch of buddies to come and play a golf tournament where he's rigging the pairings in the tee times on the final day. Like, the guys who were leading the golf tournament, they didn't go off last. It was so he's carrying something, not only a gap of not winning a major, much, much longer. He's such an outlier historically. And I've shared this several times. I've looked at every player who won at least 5 or more. The average time spent between the 4th and 5th major was 2.5 years to accomplish that. Tiger went from 4 to 5 in a month. Jack went from 4 to 5 in a year. Peter Thompson's the only one who it took more than 5 years, and he only played one major every year, and that was the Open Championship. And he won his 5th Open Championship 7 years removed. He's now after his 10th year. That's tough.
It's tough. I have shared this story on my podcast a gazillion times, so I'll be incredibly brief with it. But I spent my Wednesday afternoon last year at the Masters watching Rory play 9 holes, the back 9 with Ludwig. And it was it was my favorite experience of my 3 days on the golf course, was watching Rory and Ludwig play on that Wednesday afternoon. A lot of players and fans were watching the tail end of the par 3 contest at that time. So the golf course was fairly empty based on what it felt like on Monday and Tuesday. And it almost felt like I was, just out there, the 3 of us watching Rory and Ludwig play Augusta's back 9, and Rory showing Ludwig like the ins and outs and the nuances of the golf course. Rory was literally teaching him, having him drop balls. I'll remember those 2 hours probably for the rest of my life, watching those 2 players, because I think they shot a best ball like 31 on the back 9. I walked away. That experience was beneficial for me in predictions and costly, because I walked away saying Ludwig and Rory are the 2 best players on the property that I've seen in my 2.5 days at the Masters. I'm just telling you, the sound off the club face with what I'm seeing from those 2 players right now, it's in a different category from everything else that I've seen. And that proved out to be beneficial for me when Ludwig finished runner-up as a debutant. And also costly for me when Rory finished whatever it was, 23rd. But I remember standing on the first tee on Thursday morning with my dad, being in that first fairway, being so excited to watch Rory McIlroy play golf, because what I had watched on Wednesday, and I go to a lot of tournaments, and watch a lot of practice rounds. And what I watched on Wednesday was the swagger of a player that is hitting the ball better than anyone else I have seen, and putting with the confidence of a million suns. And he bailed out his first tee shot into that famous bunker, right bunker on one, and the shoulders were slumped. And I was like, who, what? Like, it was like the guy, got body snatched, as I have said before when I've retold the story. And ever since that moment, I'm just kind of like, as a I'm an extreme data guy, so it's very difficult to compute what is happening there in my brain because it's unquantifiable to me statistically. But ever since I watched that Wednesday practice round and then watched that Thursday round, I said to myself, I just don't know what it is, and I can't explain it.
And that's the elusive thing is he's got he has such a wonderful personal relationship with that club. I'm certain that he will be a regular member of that club if he wins the Masters. He'll never accept a membership and have a green jacket without having won it. So he has this real affection for the place, but he also has these very odd chapters. And certainly 2011, and that image will stand up for the rest of time of him up by the cabins. And in the following year, and this is a year that gets forgotten, and I get it. It was the Bubba year, and it was that was remarkable. And the Oosthuizen, albatross, and Bubba hitting the shot from the pine straw and on 10 and curving a ball that, balls don't curve like that anymore. Rory entered the weekend in 2012, one shot back, and he played Saturday with Sergio Garcia, a buddy. And I'm thinking, oh my God, he is going to exercise this demon immediately. He shot 77 that day.
Yeah.
And it was over. And then in 2018, he starts the final round, 3 back, but he's playing with the 54 leader Patrick Reed, who he has history with, who he wants a piece of. And what does he do? He didn't hit it in the right bunker. He hit it about 40 yards right of the right bunker.
I remember that. Yeah.
Shot 74.
Yeah.
And so there is, again, there are generational players that appeared earmarked for at least one. Weiskopf, Norman, Els, and here sits Rory, this generation's guy who's destined to have at least one. And now he comes here every year with all this other ancillary stuff.
Yeah.
So, but back to the technical part, which to me is, look, he's better equipped. He's got these soft arm shots. He's got this off speed stuff. His this as somebody who knows the data, his iron play is streaky.
Yeah.
And you cannot be streaky there. You have to hit the right height and the right weight. Because if you don't, you're going to be on the right, or you're going to be on the wrong quadrant of that green. And now all of a sudden you're going to be stressing the hell out of your putter, hole in and hole out. And the inevitability is, because you're going to miss 25 greens, because the winners miss 25 greens. Yeah. And he's more efficient around the greens, and he's better equipped in that area. But he's got to bring an iron game that is reliable. Like somebody we've not mentioned, it wouldn't surprise me one iota if Colin Morikawa wins the Masters.
Yeah,
he's got to be able to shake it off the putter because he's not a good putter. Yeah. But he's going to hit as many good iron shots as anybody.
Well, that's my final question with you, because I want to finish up with a little golf course talk at the end. But if I were to sit here with you 6 days out and tell you, Gary, you can have Rory and Scotty, or you can have the entire field, which one would you take?
I'd take the field.
Me too.
I'd take the field. There is, I think that this golf tournament, this major, is generally the easiest to handicap because the field is short.
The predictiveness of the course history as well.
No question.
Yeah.
But there's something, there is an aura, and I don't get into the whole mystical part of it, but I'm telling you, there's odd things happen there.
I know. You have to see it firsthand to believe it, because
Yes.
I promise you, my entire career is based off of being by the book, as data intensive as it gets. And then you watch those things happen on the property, and it's like no one will be able to tell me there aren't ghosts living in these trees. Like, there's something weird that happens at that golf course every year. I mean, so if it's the field and you had to say the challenger that you feel is most likely to overtake a Rory or Scotty, you've alluded to Colin. Would it be Colin for you?
I'd start with him. I really
Yeah.
would. And again, I've never seen somebody I've never seen somebody miss more 10 to 15-foot birdie putts than he does. And he too has got this weird little winless drought like a handful of other Americans.
Over 500 days for Morikawa since his
Incredible.
last victory. And
But
he, as well,
yeah,
is playing some of the most well-rounded golf of his career as
totally.
well.
And again, you talk about looking at strokes gain, and you look at strokes gain total, and in particular tee to green, he is number one. And you look at that stat as an overarching stat of somebody who has got to be among the best coming into that. We're talking about 10 of the last 12 winners, and he's number one. He is ahead of Scheffler. He is ahead of Rory. I think he's just under, I think he's at like a 2.8. You're the data guy, but I'd start with him. And then, Ludwig's in a kind of a scratchy place suddenly.
Yeah.
I was very bullish on him, especially at the Players. And then there's a handful of other guys that I do believe that one of the live guys is going to be a factor. It's a hard thing. It's a hard read for me. It's not the easy read, and I'm not trying to cop out on it, but whether it's Rahm, whether it's DeChambeau, Joaquin Niemann suddenly has this referendum on him, whether he feels it himself, that, hey, man, you keep winning these 54-hole events in Singapore and Adelaide. That's really nice. How about a top 10 in a major? He's got 22 major starts. It's time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been time. I think I'm with you. I think I'm a couple of days of research away from making my final prediction, but Colin is on my short list, and I can't say I've been able to get into the actual on-course product of Live this year, but I think if you're going to do your job as somebody who is truly well researched heading into the Masters, I think this is probably the first Live event that I'm going to watch all season, because in the case of Doral, a golf course I do not enjoy playing at all unless you like losing 14 water balls in one round. But what Doral does do is it's a very driver heavy golf course that gives you a bunch of long irons. And that's essentially the nature of Augusta National as well. I mean, there are a couple ways to skin the cat at Augusta, but at the end of the day, winning the Masters comes down to long iron play. I mean, every single year it is always been, and they're ancillary skills that are super important as well. Chipping off of short grass, power off the tee, lag putting, of course. But at the end of the day, if you're asking me to hang your hat on one specific statistic at Augusta National, every year it's middle to long iron play. And at least with Doral, they give you a bunch of mid to long irons. So I actually am quite curious to watch players like Rahm, Bryson, and Neiman, how they navigate Doral this week.
And Bryce, yeah, you mentioned him, and I would not, because Brooks Koepka historically, he's always been hard to handicap, and he's oddly, it's gotten even more kind of elusive to get a sense, because now it's Live. So when he's non-competitive for 4 out of 6 weeks on the PGA Tour, and then he looks like he's the only one capable of winning the next major when he gets there, like a couple of years ago, and then obviously goes to Oak Hill. I think that particular quartet, to me, one of those guys is going to be in the mix. I feel very comfortable thinking that and saying that.
Final question for you. this is a topic I could do a whole other hour
Yes.
with for you, and we should come back and do another podcast just specifically on this because I'd love to get more than the one or two I'm going to ask for from you right now. But we are both massive golf course architecture and golf travel lovers and appreciators, and I would say for me, um, what fills up my tank the most in terms of my free time and what I'm most passionate about doing outside of sitting at my computer and writing and podcasting is traveling to see as many of the great golf courses in the world and in America as possible. So I'm fascinated from you because I know that you do a bunch of golf travel as well. Give me one golf course that you've played in the last 6 to 12 months. It could be a golf course that you've played a million times. It could be a golf course that you've seen for the first time. Could be a place that is well known by every single listener, and it could be a place that it's a little bit more unheralded. But give me a place that inspired you. Give me a place that you walked off the golf course and you're like, God, that place filled up my tank today.
Yeah, God, I mean, I love the way you frame that. And I'll try to answer this by just confining it to one, but not knowing that this question was going to come. But no,
I'm not gonna shoot you for giving me two, by the way.
okay, well, I've come equipped with a couple of things that I'm going to hold up and share with you, just to kind of reinforce, kind of thoughts and feelings. Last fall, I went to Scotland with three Vanderbilt buddies, fraternity brothers of mine, um, who, it's all these years later, and getting back to my sobriety and the importance of engagement, and as opposed to what was my reflex in life when I was really spiraling, which was isolation and seeking
Yeah.
isolation. Um, I not only need engagement, I pursue it. I'm stimulated by it. I'm nourished by it. These three guys are very dear friends of mine. So I put the itinerary together, and we started up in the Highlands. I'd never been up to the Highlands before. I'd never been to Dornoch. So
Me neither. Scotland is a massive blind spot for me. I played a lot of the great golf courses in Ireland, but I've still never been to Scotland, and it's a gaping hole in my resume.
yeah, and when you do it, you're going to be as fulfilled as you could have ever hoped
Yeah.
that you would be, because you just will be, because you have the sensibilities that it's going to do to you what I would expect it will. And so, and I told these guys, I said, look, I'm not doing a hit and run at Dornoch. I'm not doing it. We're going to anchor down there. We're going to play the golf course 4 days in a row, which we did. And it was wonderful in every way. But it wasn't that place that I'm getting to. The place that I'm getting to is a place I hadn't been to in years and years, and that is Muirfield. And I went there for the first time with my father in 1995, went back for the Open Championship in 2002, played the golf course two days after. Ernie Els won one of the weirdest executed playoffs. They split a foursome into two twos. I'll never understand it. Anyway, to go back there, and I've shared these thoughts about that particular day in 2002, and even the first experience in 1995, and how much it meant to me to share it with my father, and to play your own ball in the morning, to go back in, put on a coat and tie, have this gluttonous lunch, go back out there, play alternate shot, and to feel things that I had never felt before as a young man. Things about, a depth of love for someone else who was my father. To go back there again with these three guys, to be out there, to be the last group off, and to have all of these memories of my father that I was not forcing into my mind. They were coming to me. And I've not resisted answering the question of what is your favorite golf course in the world. It's just a very impossible question for me
It
to
just
answer.
depends. I mean, I have my whole rankings of every golf course I've played in an entire spreadsheet. Um, and it just depends on my mood. It's such a difficult golf
It
question to
is.
answer.
It
Yeah.
is. And so when we left that day, when we were leaving, and it was, take a shower, you sit in this grand room. I've got this wonderful photograph that's actually in our studios in Five Club, depending on who's in the studio with me. If you see this photo of four guys sitting, and it's in that grand room at Muirfield. Anyway, I turned to my buddies and I said, "This is my favorite place in the world."
Yeah.
Uh, and so I got home from that trip and I wrote about that day. And I've got that article, which was a gift from one of the guys, that is framed on my wall. And the title of the article is Honorable Company.
Yeah.
And I wrote about, I mean, I knew this was going to get to me. I wrote about it because, these are men who didn't let go of the rope when I was, in my darkest days. But to have these feelings return to my heart and my soul about my dad. But it's not just that. The golf course itself being recessed from the Firth of Forth, and you play this routing that you play in this clockwise direction on the outward nine, and then you play the interior in a counterclockwise direction and then return, back home to the home hole. It is, to me, I think it is the finest championship golf course in the world. And so with all of that, Andy, the totality of all of that, that place is the place. But there are, look, and it's funny. This book, The Prairie
Yeah.
Ring, Chicago,
Phenomenal. Yeah.
that
Special
place
place.
is Chicago Golf Club is Muirfield in the States. It
Yeah.
has a similar type of routing. It has a cerebral type of experience. This book, by the way, won the Herbert Warren Wind Award from the USGA for literature this year. So that place gets to me. Pine Valley. This is the book Crump's Dream. I played that for the first time in 1984 with my dad when I was a junior in high school. National Golf Links. This is their history. That place is the funnest place in the world. And then I played this place for the first time last year, Sunningdale.
Heard tremendous things.
Andy, it is an enchanted forest. It's Harry Colt, and it's like I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. The clubhouse, the history, these breeds of dogs that are in every group that adds this element of just joy that it overwhelmed me. So in the last year, I've been very lucky. I have always been very fortunate. I've never taken for granted these wonderful experiences that I've had. But Muirfield in the last year got to me in a way that no place ever has.
Yeah. Hearing you say that, I've never been to Scotland, but I did take a trip to Ireland. It's been 2.5 years now, so I'm not quite checking the box of recent, but it was the golf course that I wanted to talk about once I hear you talk about Muirfield, because it was what most resonated for me in terms of hearing that experience. But I took the trip to Southern Ireland with my two closest friends in the world in September of 2022, and we stayed. Ballybunion was sort of our home base, and kind of we stayed in this like tiny little cottage on the ocean with certainly no frills. And we had a couple days of weather that were just monsoon. Like, if we were anywhere in the States, any reasonable person would, think it's the worst weather ever. But the point is, and I think that, I don't know if you're familiar. It's one of my favorite books, and the title is escaping me, but the book that Mike Kaiser wrote about what inspired him to, I think it's called Dream Golf, but the book that Mike Kaiser wrote, um, about the trip to the British Isles that inspired him to create Bandon Dunes. Um, and the writing that he was able to do about the golf culture in Ireland and Scotland, and you have to see it. Um, you have to see it to understand it, and that's not a pretentious thing to say, by the way, because the golf there is actually so much more approachable in terms of the model and the inclusiveness than a bunch of what I would imagine are our favorite golf courses in the United States. But the experience that I remember having, there's just one specific hole on Tralee. Have you played in Southern Ireland at all?
Oh, yeah. And as
Yeah,
a matter of fact, um, that's my father and I at Royal County Down.
yeah. Oh,
That's
gosh.
the fourth hole at Royal County Down. As a matter of fact, on the other side of my room, I'm looking at a wonderful photograph from one of the great photographers in golf, Larry Lambrecht, of the 17th hole at Ballybunion.
Yeah, and
It's
I
around the corner. Yeah.
And I just I remember having this specific moment after we had been getting drenched for 3 hours out there. I mean, the type of weather that it's like, forget about your score, you're making 6s or 7s on every hole, you're just trying to get through it, and finally the weather subsided, and this rainbow popped up, and I just remember sitting there thinking, like, if this is it, like I could probably die in peace. Like this is exactly why I do all this for. This is why I have invested all of these hours since I first started playing golf when I was 5 years old into building a career in this space. This moment right here with two of my best friends in the world, I imagine you probably had a similar experience with those college buddies, which is what made me think of it for me as well. But standing there watching the rainbow pop up over these giant dunes in Southern Ireland when we know we're going back to this like creaky old motel, um, it's a moment I'll never forget for the rest of my life.
So
Um,
you have a an awareness, and I'd like to believe that I had the same thing at your age, um, and it's kind of everything you're saying, you know, and again I don't say this much ever on the air, but the motto of Five Clubs is that it's the time, not the score,
yeah,
and those moments, that time, and that's why, look, if people don't get golf, I get it.
me
I,
too.
I get it, but I feel for you that you don't get it because like these trips and these things, it's like, where else in your life do you carve out? And it's not, hey guys, I'll meet you there, we'll play golf. And then, no, it's every waking moment. It's the
Yeah.
journey. It's all the anecdotal stuff. It's the throwaway lines in the rental car. It's someone trying to figure out how to drive on the wrong side of the road. Do a stick shift with your left hand.
Those back roads in Ireland.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fish and chips every night. It's all of those things. And you know, you mentioned Mike Kaiser. James Dobson wrote a book many, many years ago, and it was called Final Rounds, and it was him doing a trip to
I've got to
Ireland.
check that out. Yeah.
You do, because the first trip I made with my father was essentially the same itinerary that James did with his dad. And reading this book, and his father was older, and his father was it was twilight for him, and it was powerful. And that book was, I mean, it got to me in a very, very personal way. And so, I was lucky enough to do a handful of trips with my dad. I mean, playing the old course, and again, you know, I mean, 4:30 on a I don't even know what day of the week it was, teeing off the number one at the old course with my dad. I mean, that's just, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Are you kidding?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you remember for the rest of your life. I mean, it's just some of these indelible moments in time that, they make everything that I feel like I do worth it. Yesterday, I was able to sneak out my like Monday through Wednesdays are always brutal because we're getting out all of the content for the tournament to start. And I got kind of like a last minute invite at a place I had been wanting to play for quite some time. And, I played the round and finished and got back to my work responsibilities. And I felt so much lighter because I was just like, that was exactly what I needed to get through the rest of this crazy work week with the Masters. And, just like I have, a similar experience sometimes when I walk into like the perfectly right AA meeting for the moment, there's nothing more therapeutic for me in life like, than like a great round of golf at a special place with, the right company.
And I think part of this is the fact that I am, now in my life, I'm trying to drive toward things as opposed to retreat away from things. So the journey, like last weekend, I got in the car and I went down to, the outskirts of Ridgeland, South Carolina, to Congaree, where you've been.
Congaree's cool.
It's
I
very
really
cool.
vibed with Congaree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm lucky to have a relationship there, and as an ambassador, I'm very proud of it. And then the next morning, I got up and I drove 3.5 hours across I-16, turning right, going south on I-95 in Savannah through the Sandhills of Georgia to see this new property called Fall Line,
Of
which
course,
is
I've heard, phenomenal th
extraordinary.
I'm a big OCM fan and a big advocate of what it seems like Jeff Ogilvy's up to. I've heard tremendous, tremendous things about
Mind
the place.
blowing.
Yeah.
But my point is, yes, those places, with more time, we'll talk about them in detail. But it's going someplace and looking at the land, and not the land when I get there. I'm talking about driving and finding my mind getting quiet and experiencing solitude and listening to music as opposed to sports talk radio, which is
Yeah.
what I used to do for a living. And, like getting to Nebraska and driving towards Sandhills or up to Valentine and Caprock Ranch. And like I drove to Dornick from Edinburgh by myself to meet these buddies, rent the car. And they're like, "Are you okay doing this by yourself?" I'm like, I want to do this.
You know how
To
yeah,
do this.
I need to do this.
I
Yeah.
need to do this. So it's feeling like, I'm in pursuit of something. And that pursuit is the time, the time on these amazing, whether they're new or old places with people I care about. Yeah, it's really, again, it's, there's a great deal of gratitude that I feel, which is humbling as hell.
Gary, I imagine this is the first of many, and I could do this with you for another 6 hours this afternoon, but I know you've been incredibly generous with your time. What should any of the listeners look out for and pay attention to for Masters Week at Five Clubs?
So we will have the one show on Monday. And this is, again, when we started the show, we didn't expect, and it wasn't in, it wasn't in the agreement that we would do shows during major weeks. And, very appreciative of Golf Channel coming to us just after a couple of weeks and saying, you know what, we would like you to do shows Mondays of the Players, the four majors, and the Ryder Cup. So we'll have one show. It'll be a 2-hour show Monday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern time. And the guest list is really, it's neat. So Paul McGinley will be my first guest just after 8 o'clock. And then at the bottom of that hour, Taylor Zarger and Ron Green Jr. Ron
Yeah.
Green Jr. and his father combined have covered more than 70 Masters. So they will be in with me in the studio. And then at 9 o'clock, Jim Nantz and Gil Hance together. Gil is going to listen to Jim share his 5 favorite moments of the 40 years of him covering the Masters. And they have to be 5 different holes. And then Gil is going to share the design principles of those holes. Bob Jones and Alistair McKenzie. Gabby Herzig will be with me. She will be sharing her storylines that she's going to be pursuing during the course of the week. And then we'll put a bow on it with the 1984 and 1995 Masters champion Ben Crenshaw, who'll be with me. He'll be the last guest on the show on Monday. So
Hard to beat. We're very blessed. Hard to beat.
Yeah.
Gary, this is an absolute pleasure. Looking forward to many more of these in the future, and enjoy Masters Week, my friend.
Andy, thank you. Thanks for the time. What a true pleasure. I appreciate like hell what you're doing personally and professionally. And this is, like you said, the beginning of many conversations, not only in this forum, but I know soon enough on the golf course.
Yeah. Cheers, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you.